Will India be the next China? As China's economy continues to decline and optimistic predictions about India's growth appear around the world, that question can no longer be dismissed as the fanciful illusion of nationalists. This issue needs to be taken seriously, partly because the world has behaved as if India is a superpower. Consider this. In 2023, suspicions arose that the Indian government was involved in the murder of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil and a conspiracy to kill an American citizen on American soil. These are notable allegations, but what is more notable are the reactions. The U.S. government chose to quell the potentially outrageous consequences. They released very little information and simply allowed the matter to be resolved through the courts. In other words, the arrogance of the Indians was tolerated, not punished. This is evidence of the country's newly formed political position. From an economic perspective, China's experience over the past 40 years is indeed a particularly remarkable and difficult to replicate miracle. However, there are reasons to consider India's case, as it is no longer the economically stifled giant it once was. Over the past quarter century, India's development has faced numerous challenges due to inadequate infrastructure to meet domestic production demands, and notably, insufficient appeal to foreign companies considering India as an export base. Nevertheless, in the last decade, the country's infrastructure has seen significant improvement. Under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership, the government has undertaken the construction of highways, ports, airports, railways, power plants, and telecommunication systems on a massive scale, transforming India beyond recognition compared to just a few years ago. For instance, approximately 55,000 kilometers of national highways have been constructed since the current government took office in 2014. Digital infrastructure has also undergone a transformation. Once technologically lagging, the country has now become more advanced, with ordinary Indians able to use smartphones for even the most routine shopping transactions. More importantly, the digital network now serves all of India's citizens, enabling the government to introduce programs like direct cash transfers to the poor, while the private sector utilizes it as a platform for entrepreneurship and innovation. Simultaneously, the Modi government's new welfareism has contributed to improving the quality of life for Indians. This unique approach prioritizes providing basic private goods and services, ensuring access to clean fuel, sanitation systems, electricity, housing, water, and bank accounts, while making it clear to citizens that the government is the benefactor. Thanks to these programs, India can now support vulnerable groups by providing employment and free food during challenging times like the COVID-19 pandemic. India's remarkable ability to build and deliver services at a large scale is noteworthy. These are major policy achievements, the culmination of cumulative efforts with national significance. Many of these initiatives were initiated by previous central and local governments, but the Modi administration deserves credit for accelerating their implementation, and there are signs that these initiatives are yielding results. Firstly, India has added a crucial new impetus to skill-based service exports. India's service sectors boomed in the early 2000s, but stalled after the global financial crisis of 2008-2009. Now, this sector has been revitalized. In 2022, India's global market share increased by 1.1 percentage points, about 40 billion, reflecting a significant leap on the skills ladder. In 2023, India is likely to gain additional global market share, but at a slower pace. Indians who once wrote cheap code or worked in customer service over the phone are now running global competence centers with highly skilled personnel, conducting analysis tasks for leading global companies. J.P. Morgan Chase has over 50,000 employees in India. Goldman Sachs's largest office outside of New York is in Bengaluru. Accenture, Amazon, and many other companies are also present here on a large scale. This explosion has fueled the construction of high-rise apartments, with cranes scattered across the skylines of tech cities like Ahmedabad, Bengaluru, Hyderabad, Mumbai, and Pune. SUV sales have surged, luxury shopping centers and upscale restaurants have sprung up like mushrooms, all supported by a boom in personal credit. India's global market share in the high-skill services sector. Note: data includes finance, insurance, intellectual property, telecommunications and IT services, other business activities, and personal services. Source: World Trade Organization. Furthermore, there are signs indicating that Uttar Pradesh, the most populous and one of the least developed states in India, is gradually rejuvenating. The state is overhauling its dilapidated infrastructure, not to mention numerous temples, managing its finances, and reducing corruption and violence under the charismatic leadership of a religious figure-turned-politician who is a Hindu priest. If Uttar Pradesh can eventually become an attractive investment destination, it has the potential to change the trajectory of the entire country due to its demographic strength. The transformation of this state will signal that India's Hindu heartland, once derogatorily referred to as Bimaru, or diseased regions, will not remain underdeveloped forever. Lastly, the downward spiral of China's economy under President Xi Jinping is accelerating. As a result, capital is fleeing China at an alarming rate. According to official figures, $69 billion in net corporate and household capital flowed out of the country in 2023. There are indications that a small portion of this capital is finding its way to India. The most prominent example is Apple establishing factories in several Indian states to easily cater to the domestic market and diversify its export base, especially as U.S.-China economic tensions escalate. This helps build a chain of electronic equipment suppliers in India, some of which are planning to establish large factories, especially in the southern part of the country, employing over 20,000 workers. This is a remarkable phenomenon in a country characterized by small-scale manufacturing companies and inefficient operations. If these large-scale factories indeed operate efficiently, they could generate a surge in goods exports, thereby altering prospects, not only for India's long-struggling manufacturing sector, but also for low-skilled workers who cannot benefit from the boom in high-skill export services. It is worth reflecting upon. India's low-skill exports will never rival China's competitive edge, reflected in a global market share exceeding 40%. This is because the unique economic and political circumstances that encourage developed countries to shift much of their industrial base to just one country no longer exist. However, in the coming decade, India could significantly increase its market share from its current around 3% to 5 to 10%, equivalent to hundreds of billions of dollars in additional exports. Despite some favorable signs, any claims of India replacing China are premature. The reason is that the encouraging signs have not yet been convincingly reflected in economic data, while government policies still have shortcomings that are insufficient to realize new opportunities. Looking at economic data, there has been skepticism about claims that India can truly leave behind the lost decade of the 2010s, a period marked by modest growth, little structural transformation, and few job creations. While the country's economy has indeed rebounded after COVID, it has done so unevenly, prioritizing capital over labor, favoring large businesses over small ones, and benefiting the middle class and the wealthy over the millions working in the informal economy. Part of the reason is that India has so far only capitalized on a small fraction of the new opportunities created by China's relative economic downturn. Despite the determination to carry out the Make in India campaign, the government has not yet succeeded in persuading many companies to expand operations in India. In fact, foreign direct investment, FDI, is gradually declining. India also accounts for a smaller share of FDI inflows into emerging markets, excluding China. Not only foreign investors are hesitant, even domestic businesses are reluctant to invest, despite the government's infrastructure improvements, subsidies, and in some cases, even protectionist policies for manufacturing. Private investment in factories and machinery has yet to recover from the slump in the past decade. And there are no convincing signs that this situation is about to reverse. In fact, announcements of new projects in 2023 actually decreased in nominal value compared to the previous year. As a result, India's exports of manufactured goods, a source of employment for a vast number of ordinary workers, remain weak. In fact, India's global market share in crucial sectors like textiles has declined since the global financial crisis. All of these are major concerns for the Modi government and even the central bank. The central bank recently issued a report calling for the private sector to act together and reduce the burden of investment on the government. Why are companies hesitant to seize the clear opportunities in front of them? Fundamentally, because they perceive the risks involved in doing so are too high. The concerns of businesses lie in three main issues. First, they worry that the software of policy planning is still weak. The playing field is not level as some large domestic conglomerates and certain foreign giants are perceived to be favored, thereby disadvantaging the overall investment environment. Essentially, as each favored company decides to invest, their risks diminish, while more competitors choose to cut expenditure as their risks increase. For them, the risk becomes a victim of arbitrary state action that remains significant. Secondly, despite the government acknowledging the necessity to boost exports, they still maintain an inward-looking policy, meaning import barriers. Protectionism is making a comeback as many believe that India's domestic market is too vast and domestic companies are advanced enough to easily replace foreign firms as long as they receive government support. This is unsurprising. Economic nationalism always goes hand in hand with political nationalism. But the issue is, India's domestic market is not particularly large, at least for items targeting the middle class that global companies are trying to sell. And frequent announcements of protectionist measures have actually deterred investment in India as companies become risk-averse, anticipating that sooner or later they will be cut off from vital foreign supply sources. For instance, the announcement last August that laptop imports would be restricted caused panic among crucial IT companies. Eventually, the restrictions were eased, but the anxiety persists, especially as similar measures have been implemented in other sectors. Above all is the issue of the boundary between politics and economics. Investment and growth can exist, even thrive, amid institutional decay, as long as the political regime remains stable, and Modi's approval ratings may signal stability. But growing discontent and unrest among minority communities, southern states, opposition factions, and northern Indian farmers have raised the likelihood of trouble. As the famous economist John Maynard Keynes once said, "The inevitable will never happen. It's the unexpected that always is." We may hope for India's present, but we still need to worry about its future.